Well, hey there, Cynthia here. Welcome to my quilt lab. Today I'm working on the Illusion Sample of the Month, block number 8. That's this guy right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Pretty little starburst. This is my Scrappy version. You can see in the pattern here. It was designed by the very talented Mr. Scott Flanagan for Banyan Batiks. But I like the pattern so much I thought I'd make my own version. So I hope you've had fun following along. Let's jump into month 8 and see what it has in store for us. Let's get going. Okay, so let's talk about that main block. You can see I got a bunch of paper over here. That's right, we're doing paper piecing again. I love paper piecing. All right, please, when you look at your instructions, they'll tell you how much to print off of each. There's 4 of these and there's 1 of the others. So make sure you print off enough. You can see that they're very easily colored and identified. The only mistake is, and hopefully this will get fixed in a reprint, is the red fabric is fabric number 3, not fabric number 1. But because it's color coded, it's kind of easy to figure it out. So no worries there. Here's all my fabric, and of course I'm not talking sizes because I want to respect Scott's copyright of his pattern, but you can see I have a slew of stuff here. The nice thing about his instructions is, once again, his pieces of fabric are much bigger than what we're going to need for the paper piecing, which is super nice because then we don't have to worry about making sure that we have enough fabric to go to all the ends of the square. On each page is also a little inch mark. So when you go to copy it, just grab your ruler and make sure it really is the size it's supposed to be, because sometimes copiers will shrink or make it big, and that's just check the setting on your printer or your copier just to make sure, because we want to make sure you get the right size block in the end. All right, so give everything a nice press. Grab everything you need, and I'll see you as we start some paper piecing. Let's get started. Okay, so let's just do some paper piecing housekeeping tips and tricks before we get started. I've talked about this in previous videos that I've had the paper piecing, and just want to cover it real quick again. So once you, like I said earlier, once you've printed out everything, make sure that it does measure the size it's supposed to be, because printers can change those things sometimes. You just want to make sure that we end up getting the size of block that we need. Oh, sorry about that. And take a look at the pieces. What you see on top is actually going to be a mirror version of what the block will actually look like when we're done. And it's kind of easier to see on this piece over here. On this piece, it has the red on the left and the teal on the right. But actually, when the block is finished, because we're putting it on the back side, it's going to be a mirror image of that. So don't be surprised, don't be shocked. That's just kind of the nature of paper piecing. Also want to tell you to grab a few tips and tricks and tools. You'll see that I'm just using paper, just my regular office paper, but there's a great product out there by Carol Doak. It's foundation paper piecing paper, and it's sort of like a newsprint. Runs through the printer super well, and it's an awesome product if you have it. If you don't worry. I'm just using office paper, so you can see how easy it is when we get going. That it's totally up to you. I just want to throw out some options. I'm also a big believer in this little tool right here. This is called an add a quarter ruler, and see if I can turn it over in the light. You can see there's a little ledge, a little lip right here, and what happens is that butts up against the fabric so that when we go to trim away, it makes that add a quarter, that extra fabric that we need for the seam allowance, super easy. So you'll see me using that, but don't worry, you can totally use your regular ruler. Just line up against that 1/4 of an inch line. Some other lovely things I like to use just to make my life easier. I always have a glue stick available, and I use this just to kind of tack the fabric down onto the paper. That way when I take it to the sewing machine, it's not flopping around. So I have some Fons and Porter, and I usually keep this stuff for when I'm doing seams because it's a lovely 1/4 of an inch. So guys, just, you know, grab some school Elmer's, whatever, and you're just using a little dab of it. So you'll see me using this product too when I start some paper piecing. Speaking about sewing, if you haven't put a new needle in that machine, now's the time, because paper will dull your needle a little bit faster than just fabric, so it's always a good idea to switch it out. Also, you're going to be shortening that stitch length, so instead of your regular stitch length, you want to make it really, really small, and that's because it's going to be making perforation little marks through the paper, and the more perforation marks you have, the easier it is to take that paper off at the very end. Speaking about taking the paper off, in the instructions he does recommend that we leave the paper on entirely until we get to that last block, the last piecing. So don't go crazy yet, leave it all attached, and you'll see me through the video following his instructions. Just a couple other things that I do a little differently that you'll see me is that most traditional paper piecing will tell you to start and end your seam right on those lines, but you can see here, so this is the seam allowance on the outside. If any of my seams hit that seam allowance, I take my stitch all the way past. So I will be doing stitching like that all the way through. Now that said, over on this piece, how there's a seam right there, that's where I'm going to be stopping or starting. It just kind of depends on what I'm going to be. You don't want to go past that because it's going to go into your other fabric and you're going to have to rip some stitches out. So just be very cautious. Anytime there's an internal seam, I like to really crank my wheel and make sure that needle lands right where it needs to. But then here at the end, I'll go straight through that seam allowance. And the only reason I do that is because I like to have the fabric closed here, seamed closed, because it's easier for me when I go to trim the block down to the appropriate size. That's just me though. There are lots of other people out there that have other tips and tricks with paper piecing, so please find something that works best for you. I'm just describing what works best for me. So we got everything. There's my tips and tricks for the day. Let's start pulling some fabric for that first block. You're going to need background 1 and fabric number 2, and you should have 4 of these printed off. All right, let's get going. Okay, block number 1. I got my orange, I got my 2 background pieces, and you can see in his instructions he's very generous. It's much bigger than the piece that we need, which is awesome. A little tip, if you're doing any type of paper piece and you want to make sure your fabric is at least 1/4 of an inch bigger than the piece that you want. So you see how this goes all the way past? That's perfect. I like to tell people 3/8 because it's always easier to cut away than it is to add. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to do some folding here, and he has you fold between each piece, but because there's only a few folds in these papers, I like to do them all at once. So I'm going to fold on that line between each section that way, and I'm going to do the other one too while I'm at it, so might as well get all the folding done out of the way. I fold this way and then I fold back that way so that you can see it, so that we can see it when we go to place the paper. And I will do that with all of them right at the front. That way I can just whip through these things really quick. All right, so we got our fabric, we got our folded. He has a lovely mantra that he puts in there called fold, cut, sew, press. So keep that in your mind. We have folded, we're going to cut, then we're going to sew, we're going to press. So this goes face down on that, so you'll see the back of it all the way around. And this is why I like to use that glue. So I'm just going to put a little bit of glue right there, and that down like that. And that's just to help it, you know, when I take it to the machine, it keeps everything sort of together, which is nice. So get the little press. We've done piece 1, we need to do piece 2. So just like he says, fold, we're gonna cut. So grab your ruler or grab your add a quarter ruler. And this is why I like it. See how it just kind of butts up there against the fabric? That's 1/4 inch of fabric, so we can cut the rest away. Grab your rotary cutter, swipe. This is now scrap. Ooh, something, another scrap project in my future. All right, take that away. Fold this back open, turn it over, and you see that was the background number 1, so grab that piece of background number 1. And like I said earlier, your fabric needs to go 1/4 inch all the way beyond. So when this gets seamed and gets folded over, that's going to be perfect. In fact, you can do something like this. Remember your 1/4 inch seam. See how that's going to be way beyond that corner? And you can lift up and just make sure that, yep, that's going to be great. So line those 2 edges up, flat it down. If you want to put another piece of glue in right there, you absolutely can. I like to use a pin. And I'll go through all 3 layers, the background, the orange, and the paper. And I'm going to push it as far away as I can, because if I have my pin close up to that edge, that means my machine's going to have some issues when I go to seam it. So I like to put it as far away as possible. Now I can take this to the sewing machine, and because this seam hits the outside, hits that seam allowance around the block, I'm going to stitch all the way through that 1/4 inch seam, just like I talked about a little bit earlier. Don't forget to shorten your stitch length somewhere between 14 to 16 stitches per inch. Let me go do this, and I'll be right back with step number 3, which is, or step number 4, which is press. Be right back. All right, I did my sew. So we did the fold, cut, sew. Now it's time to press. So I just need to take out my pen, and I'm going to take this. Look at how, I wonder if I can see how short my stitches are. That's good. Now we're going to take this to the iron and press it open. Don't worry about the paper. Just keep the paper face down when you go to press it. And I'll be back in just a second so you can see what it looks like. All right, and there it is pressed open. So we have done 2/3 of our block. All right, so we repeat the mantra, fold, which is nice because I've already done that once. I can just open that up a little bit. Cut. Get your cutter out. Put that right down on top. And you can see my seam, but I didn't fold that very well, did I? There we go. I gotta fold better, guys. Cut. More scraps. Fold that back open. Turn it over. Grab my other piece. Line it up, and you can see if I do it this way, it's going to be much bigger. Line it up there. Throwing my pin in again, so I'm really far away from that edge. Now I can do step number 3, which is sew. So and sew, and I'll be right back, and we'll do press. There's my seam, taking my pin out. Now we can press this. All right, there's the pressing. Let me turn it over so we can take a look. Beautimous. And the last step is just to trim off all that extra. Now remember, that little white space, that is the seam allowance, so include that in. Do not cut that off, or you're going to be very sad when it comes to piecing this block together. So I'm grabbing my regular ruler and I'm putting it on. I'm using my 1/4 inch to line on that seam allowance, just to make sure I'm nice and straight. And now I can chop off all this extra. And there you go. So let me flip her over. Very pretty. Okay, crew. So we're going to do this block 3 more times. So if you need to go back and rewind the video and do a step-by-step along with me for the other 3, feel free. And then we have the other lovely pieces. And they're all pretty easy, so I'll do one of them on camera, just kind of sped up so you can see me piece it. And then I will meet you at the end when all of these are finished, and we'll talk about putting them together. All right, I'll see you in a little bit. Hang in there. Okay, I'm getting ready to do this block right here, and these are all my fabrics. I want to throw you one more tip before I speed through this. Here are my four different fabrics. Fabric 1, the 2 background pieces, 4 and 3, or fabric 5, excuse me, and fabric 3. I'm reading the piecing instead of the fabrics. What I like to do is I like to lay out my fabric in the order that I'm going to be piecing them. So you'll see it's the yellow, background, teal, and red. And I do that to help avoid confusion, because we all know that we get pulled away from our sewing table, or, you know, the doorbell rings, and keeping them in a nice order means that I don't have to go searching for the fabric. I know exactly which piece of fabric I need to grab next. All right, so there's my little tip. I'm going to start in on this block, and I'll see you at the end. So there's our paper piece. There's the 4 the same and the 4 different colors, and you can see the paper is still attached. I am going to throw out one more tip, and it has to do with this block, because you probably saw in my demo that I got really close to that square. There's a square of fabric for the 2 background pieces. Make sure that it's actually going 1/4 inch beyond, if not just a smidgen more, because otherwise the side pieces of fabric will not catch it. So just be sure that you're pushing this square a little further this way, and that there's that 1/4 inch. All right, my little tip. Let me zoom up a little bit. All right, here we go. So you have your 4, what are going to be the corners, and you have the 4 sides. Now before we can go on, there's a missing spot, a missing point. There's 4 little squares left over. And in the directions, so I did them out of order, guys. All joking aside, I did everything out of order. It says to do this first, this third, and this second. Well, I like to do all my paper piecing. Okay, so you'll notice that there's a pattern with these things, and it's going to go and make this pretty little square, you see how they're all kind of matching together, and they're going to match up with these squares. So it's kind of obvious. See, there's the purple, there's the teal, there's the blue, even though I'm using a slightly different print. So we got to make this square. In the directions, I think it's actually, this is the top, but you can see why I'm doing it at the end. That way you really see the pattern of what's going to happen with the paper pieces. So just like every other 4 patch that we've done, we're going to do the 2 seams together, pressing the opposite ways so that they'll nest together when you do that center seam. So that's pretty easy to do, so I won't show that on camera. I know this, you guys are awesome. You don't need me to show you that. So just make sure you're pressing in the opposite ways, that way it nests together in the center. That way we can come and put everything together at the end with all those other 4 corners. Isn't that cute? All right, so I'm going to do this real quick. We'll come back and we'll talk about piecing everything together, and I'll see you in just a moment. All right, so there's that cute little 4 patch, and look how all the colors match up. So cute. Love this. Yes, all the paper is still in the back of these blocks because I want to just address something really quick, and this is something that is in the shop notes versus in the instructions. The instructions has you take off the paper as you go, but they did mention something in the shop instructions that I want to share with you. Anytime you do a more complicated block, you'll often have, for paper piecing, you'll often have that in pieces, and you'll piece the entire block together with that paper attached. So I didn't take the paper off immediately because I want to give you the option of actually putting these together with the paper attached to the back. And there's pluses and minuses with both. I'm using the just basic office paper right now, so it's a little thicker. But if you're using that Doak paper, which is a newspaper print kind of feel, it's a little grittier, it's a little easier to tear. That's a little easier to work with. Not that you have to use it. I'm just, sharing some options. And the other cool thing about piecing it together with the paper on the back, because we know everything is squared the way it ought to be, when you place them on top of each other, so it's going to be the perfect square. So let me just, like if I put the pin through this line right here on this side, when I turn it over, it's through the line on the other side. So we know that that stitch, you'll be stitching right there, will be a perfect stitch, and you don't have to worry about, is my 1/4 inch good, is it not, because it's all printed, so you don't have to worry about that. But you can also absolutely take the paper off right now and then piece it together without any paper. It is your quilt. I just wanted to throw out that options, and the instructions for piecing it together is the same either way. You're going to put them in rows first, and you're going to press always towards the orange pieces on the 4 corners, and then in on that 4 patch there in that center, so that when you do these 2 seams, it'll nest really nicely in those 4 corners right there. If you are doing taking the paper off, let me just show you how easy it is to do that, and I'll clear all this away. I'll use one of the fancier ones, because if you can do this one, you can do this one. So basically, you're taking the paper off in the reverse order that you put the fabric on. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Start with 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And what I like to do is bend it back a couple of times, score my nail over the edge of those perforations that we made with the needle, and then just start pulling. See, this is why we have the more stitches per inch, because look how easily that popped off. If you do have any problems taking paper off, now's the time to grab your stiletto or a pin, and you can lightly score, very lightly, along the edge of those perforated pieces. It's also nice to have something pointy nearby in case you have any pieces of paper stuck in any certain places. So we did 2, we're going to move down to 3. There we go. And then 2. And then 1. And I'm just going to kind of pull at the fabric to help it pop off a little bit. There we go. And see how I have just a little bit of piece of paper right there? This is where a stiletto or a pin comes in handy, so I could just use the point of it and just work that piece of paper away. There we go. So that's all taken off. I would take this and just give it a nice press before I put it in the block, but otherwise that's real easy. And you can do this with each piece right now, or you can do this at the end when you put that entire block together. So let's put that entire block together, and I'll snap some pictures as I go, and I'll see you at the end. All right, there's that finished block. Isn't it pretty? Oh, it's so pretty. I just love paper piecing because everything just seems to line up so nicely. Just throwing in a couple more tips. Remember, these points are good places to put pins in so you get a nice matching up. Also, please notice that that little diamond, yellow diamond matches up with the corners, the cross sections of that middle square. So it's a good place to throw a pin in as well. So you get nice lines throughout the whole thing. So pretty. Let's say it again. Love paper piecing. It's probably one of my favorite techniques because it always ends up looking just so crisp, so nice, so wonderful. So let's move on to those accent strips. Give this guy a nice press, maybe put some best press on it, set it aside, and let's grab the rest of the fabric. So here's the fabric that we need for the accent strips. I got 10 small squares from background 1 and 12 small squares and 3 bigger squares from background 3. I also have 10 small squares from each of the 9 fabrics. I know what you're thinking, 9 and 10. Cynthia, what do you need to do? You need to duplicate one of them, and I have picked this the light teal to duplicate. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, so that I have 10 squares in that same size as that background 1. Also, we're going to be doing small squares, 4 of them in fabrics 2, 3, and 4, and a big square of fabrics 6, 7, and 9. And you could probably figure out that this is one accent strip and that this is the second accent strip, and you would be right. So let's tackle the small squares first, and we'll set this stack aside. And this time around, we are doing some, well, it's not really 4 patches. It's like all of the squares put together. You're just flipping them around. Now, if you look at the picture, you can absolutely do what the picture does. I'm going to mix it up a little bit and move my fabrics around so it won't quite look like the picture if you're following along with the instructions. But this is the fun part of doing a block of the month, is that you can kind of mix it up and make it your own. So I'm going to have 1 4 patch, and then the rest are going to be in 1 long strip for the rest of the accent strip. So let me zoom through and make my little strip, and I'll see you at the end. All right, so this is what I've come up with. I like this kind of order. I mix it up because I had a bunch of solids in here and I didn't want to have two solids next to each other. It's a fun little thing. But feel free to do exactly what the directions show. Again, it is your quilt, but this is an opportunity to have some fun. So the next step is to put all these together. And of course, the easy one is the little 4-patch up here. You're doing them in rows. You're pressing towards that background and then nesting them together. And that's that single one that gets set sort of down the bottom of the square. The next one is you're doing all of this in a strip and you're pressing the top row all towards the right and you're pressing that bottom row all towards the left. That way it'll nest at each point where they come together. All right, so I'm going to take that to the sewing machine. I'll take a few pictures as I go so that you can see the progress. And this is a pretty simple little accent strip, so I'll see you at the end. Okay, so there are the finished pieces, our little 4-patch, and then our longer strip. Flip it over so you can see it's all pressed in the right directions. They nest up really nicely in those corners. All right, so the first accent strip is finished. Give it a little best press, you know, make it nice and pretty, and then set it aside. And let's grab the rest of those fabrics. So if you remembered, we had a bunch of little squares and a bunch of big squares. All right. So for the next accent strip, the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be drawing a diagonal across the wrong sides of all those little squares. And I've already done 4 of them so I can show you what the next step is. So once you got those all drawn, the backgrounds will be paired. The small background pairs will be with the big ones, and the different color little ones will be with the big background ones. You've seen this a lot with some previous stuff. So what we're going to be doing is, it's kind of like a snowball. If you've ever done a snowball block before, but instead of having like an octagon, you're just going to have the squares. So you're going to be putting these in each of the corners, seaming them and opening them open. I like to do the opposite ones first, press them open, trim away, and then do the 2 other sides. So I'll demo the one square with a few pictures, and then we're going to do the other 2 with the rest of the backgrounds, and the same thing with the 3 different small colors with that big background square. Again, it's another pretty easy accent strip. And let's get going. All right, there's our 6 blocks, the square inside a square, and there's the 3 backgrounds, and there's 3 different colors, so they get laid out just like this in this order: orange, dark teal, red, blue, green, and violet. So this is how they'll get pieced together. And I did trim a little bit because some of my squares were just a slightly bit bigger than they needed to be. I always like to throw that out because sometimes, you know, we don't always piece the best, and that's okay. We can square up as we go, which is what I did. So we're going to piece all of these together, and we're going to press everything towards the right except for this last one. This last seam will get pressed towards the left because that's going to nest when we put everything together at the end. So I'm going to go and piece these blocks together so our second accent strip will be finished, and I'll see you in just a moment. All right, and there she is, all done. I will say these seams are a little bulky here in the corners. Not all of my corners turned out just perfect, but I'm pretty pleased with it overall. So if I did this again, I probably would open up these seams just because that's a lot of bulk. But you can see I pressed everything to the right except for that last one. All right, so that's accent strip number 2. You know what that means. It's time to put everything together. Let me grab all my stuff and I'll be back in just a second. Okay, everyone, it is month 8. Putting it all together. I have all my pieces, the main block, the first accent strip of squares, the second accent strip of squares in squares, and of course all of my background pieces for piecing that block together. Everything's cut and ready to go. Let's sort it out here on the table. That big block goes up in the kind of the top left corner. This cute little square and square is going to go down here, and the other accent strip gets put up here with the other one down in the bottom. Now remember, that accent strip doesn't look exactly like the picture does, so I have the opportunity to, flip it around if I don't like it. Do we like that? No, I think I'm going to stick to my first so that the blues are opposite. Keeping it real. And which way do I want to like that? Yeah, I think I like that. See? Making it my own. All right, let's grab those background pieces. There's a little square for the corner. We got the sashing, of course, to go around the big square. The shorter pieces are going on either side. And then the longer piece will go on the top and the bottom. That leaves the 2 big pieces. We'll flank those accent strips. There we go. All right, so that's what it's going to look like. Let's talk about sewing this together, and I'll take pictures as I go. I'm going to start up here with that big square, and I'm going to do those sashing pieces first. So first I'm going to do the side pieces, and I'm going to press out away from the block. Then I'll add the top and the bottom, and again pressing away from that block so that whole block will be sashed. I'm going to move over here to the right. I'm going to put the background onto the accent strip. I'm going to press towards that background so that the left's done. The right is done, so let's put it together with that middle seam. And I'm going to press towards that background, towards that big square, so that entire top will be finished. Let's talk about the bottom. So let's go all the way to the bottom row. I'm going to put backgrounds on either side of this cute little squares, and I'll press towards that background so that bottom row is done, and I'll attach it to the square in a square accent strip, and I'll press down so the top is done, the bottom is done, so all that's left is this seam right here, and I'm going to press up towards the top. Please note that there's going to be some nice nesting at these points around this green square and a square. That'd be good places for you to throw pins in. And yeah, let's get going. I'll see you at the end, okay? There it is, guys. Look at that. Month number 8 of this block of the month. It's so pretty. Oh, I love the starburst. I love all the different shapes of squares. This is a beautiful block, and I am so excited to see what happens next in month 9. So that's 9, 10, 11, 12. Wow, we are so close to the end of this block of the month. Thank you so much for joining me on this ride. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments below. Share, like, subscribe with all your friends. I really appreciate it, and I'll check you out next month in my quilt lab. This is Cynthia signing off. Have a good one, guys. Bye-bye.